2002, and we're in Douglas, Alaska. My name is Ellen Campbell, and I'm interviewing Sigurd T. Olson as part of the Conserving Our Wildlife Conservation Heritage program with the Wildlife Society. We're sitting on Sig's back deck here, and I guess the first question I want to ask Sig is, can you give us just some biographical information, like your birthplace and when you were born, your parents, and perhaps a little bit about your early years and what influenced you into going into wildlife biology as a career? Cut. Okay.
Well, I was born back in Ely, Minnesota, September 15th, 1923. And my parents were living in Ely, of course, and my dad was a teacher of biology and this type of thing at the local junior college. As a matter of fact, I think he may have taught at the high school a little bit, but my memory is of a college there. And we were a very outdoor family. To work in the summertime, my dad in his earlier years was a guide in the canoe country up there. And he later had a canoe outfitting business that I grew up guiding for, that type of thing. But yeah, he was right there in the Superior National Forest. And probably one of the most ideal places one could pick to be born in and grow up in. And we're a very outdoor family. Summertime we were out in the woods in the canoe country, and a lot of skiing, a lot of cross-country skiing. I think I did my first cross-country skiing when I was about 4 years old. I remember seeing a picture of it. And skied ever since. So that actually I grew more enthusiastic as I went along. And the kind of skiing, it was cross-country skiing there and ski jumping, because most of the towns in northern Minnesota had ski jumps in them, and it was lots of Finnish people, Slovenian people, and they were very good at it. And so we grew up doing that, plus cross-country skiing, which is real important. And the summertime, of course, was canoe country, and I spent an awful lot of time out in the woods on canoe trips and growing up with my dad and my mom. That was just one of the things we always did in the summertime. So that was sort of life growing up.
Got your interest in outdoor career? Is that what started?
Well, I think probably one of the reasons I went into the career that I chose was where I grew up. We were out in the woods all the time, out on the lakes. And my dad being a biologist certainly had a definite effect on me. I just found out that's what I like to do, and that's what entranced me. And so I didn't have a choice, as I remember. I don't remember thinking of anything else that I'd rather be, unless boyhood things like maybe I wanted to fly an airplane or something like that. But when I got right down to what am I going to do, well, that was the basic reason. And I loved the woods. I grew up, it was just a natural thing for me. I never had to learn to like it. And so much of my time was spent. And as soon as I was able to, got big enough, my dad and a couple of partners had a canoe outfitting business, and I guided for them all summer long, every year that I was home. So.
What about your education then? What did you go on to in school?
Well, I went through the usual high school education and junior college there at home. That was where my dad was the dean. It wasn't too bad having as a dean, though. He understood the situation very well. But at any rate, that's where my interest in being a wildlife management biologist started. And the more I got into it, the more it appealed to me. And then I eventually wound up going to the University of Minnesota. And I was under the assistance, if you want to call it, or tutelage of Dr. William H. Marshall, who steered me along through the intricacies of education in wildlife management. And I have to attribute if any success of mine, however, probably centered on my dad and Dr. Marshall as major influences in my life, my life's career, put it that way. The love of outdoors and doing outdoors things, and my skiing and hiking and canoe trips and this type of thing were all a result of the way I was raised and the atmosphere I grew up in. And
what degree did you get there?
I got a master's degree in wildlife management, much to my surprise. I think maybe my teacher surprised. I didn't know if I could stay inside long enough to do it, but thanks to Dr. Marshall, he picked out a subject for me, which was loons. Nobody had ever done anything on wild loons. And he convinced me that, why don't you do it? I thought it was kind of a goofy idea. But over time, it panned out to be one of the most interesting things I could have done. And mainly because to do it, I had to spend all my study time out in the lake country studying loons. And I know my wife and I spent a lot of time out there chasing loons around the Boundary Waters Canoe Area, Superior National Forest in this country. And I imagine, and even going into on the Canadian side, it was just the same kind of country. And so I had the opportunity there of, nobody had ever done anything on loons. Sort of a first opportunity. Not to mention the fun of doing it, or the pleasure of doing it. Fun is fun, but pleasure and fun together is what this was. And so that's sort of how I got started. And of course, my guiding during the summers for my dad and canoe trips gave me even a broader look at wild country, if you want to call it that, and wilderness and this type of thing, which has always been an important part of my growing up or my life as a whole. And I think that's one of the main reasons that I wound up here. From coming to Alaska, which wasn't too well, it was still fairly early time when we first came up here in 1951. So I look back on it and I think I was glad that I got here. That isn't the earliest by any stretch of the imagination, but it was early enough before a lot of the big development took place. There were lots of Alaska that hadn't been looked at or seen very much, and doing the wildlife work here was the opportunity of being first to do a lot of things. I won't say, I can't say that I was the only one who did it. I had a lot of help. There were a lot of old timers. There were a lot of game wardens, people who were the game wardens. Were very knowledgeable, and I learned just an awful lot from local people who worked here a long time before I got here. I have to give them that pat on the back, because if it hadn't been for, I remember Lee Ellis down in Wrangell, very quiet, unassuming, totally skillful in the woods person, and I just learned an awful lot from him when I was starting out in Ketchikan, but mostly Petersburg, before I got up here into the center of the country. So.
Was this, after you graduated from school, what was your first job then? Did you come right up to Alaska with the Fish and Wildlife Service?
Yeah.
What kind of work did you do?
Just wildlife management. It's kind of hard. What do you do? We did a lot of studies, a lot of surveys and this type of thing, ranging from waterfowl at summertime. And I got pretty much involved in deer populations here. A lot of deer around here. Nobody knew a great deal about them, other than the old timers, how to shoot them. But nobody had done any real work on deer and just wildlife as a whole. They knew there were a lot of knowledgeable people about it, but there hadn't been very much formal work done on it. So I had that opportunity, which was, and again, relying so often on people who'd been here and knew what they were talking about, experiences they had, helped a lot. Saved me a lot of, or solved a lot of my problems, I'll put it that way. And also a lot of pleasure, and it resulted in a lot of lifetime friends and whatnot. And, a lot of them have passed away yet, but there's still those people around who I associated with when I was, quotation mark, growing up here. So.
Started with Fish and Wildlife Service, then did you switch over to the Forest Service? And what year was that?
Oh my, I knew you'd ask something like that. The dates, frankly, I'd have to go back and check it out.
Actually, you worked for Alaska Department of Fish and Game for a couple of years too.
Yeah, that I guess I'd have to go back and take a look at dates from something that.
So you were up in Fairbanks?
Pardon?
You were up in Fairbanks?
Yeah, we were up there for a while, and did some of the work on when you were doing the looking for new national forest areas and this type of thing. There wasn't a long stay up there, but
and that was through 1959 with the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Yeah.
And 59 through 61 with Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Were there any special projects there that come to mind?
Well, mainly I think with Fish and Game was identifying wildlife habitat. and deer in particular, establishing a better knowledge of where they winter, how they winter, and this type of thing. And of course, that means the areas that had to be protected for winter survival, and understanding deer from that respect. And I'll say again, a lot of the early fellows who trapped, hunted, lived here, gave me a lot of information on that, and was able to apply it towards the what kind of seasons we should have and that type of thing. It wasn't that technical. I think it was more common sense than anything else. Deer are perfectly capable of taking care of themselves if given a half a chance.
Yeah.
Biologists or similar occupations where you're not doing something just to earn money. You're doing something because it's a love affair. You like to do it, and I think that's what is very important as far as using common sense and not going overboard or doing some wildly crazy things experimentally. My experience has been the skill and the common sense that people involved in both fish and wildlife management use, and the use of experience of people who may not have gone through the university and gotten a degree in wildlife or fisheries management, but people who had the experience to help you put that work together successfully, or put your education to work so it worked well. And it wasn't done on I'll teach you how to do this. It was done on an association basis, where you just learn to do those things through working and living and being friends with these people who lived here, not necessarily wildlife or fisheries biologists by any stretch of the imagination, but
there must have been very few wildlife biologists in this.
There weren't very many. We were, I think, in a way, a chosen few for a while. I think it's supposition, but I think that there might have been a tendency by some of the old timers, the darn kids coming out of here from school, think they know something about wildlife. We're going to find out, and we did. I have to say that. But yeah, it's frosty out here this morning.
You moved from Fish and Game to the Forest Service in '61, looks like.
I guess so.
Tell me what kind of work you did then. So any special projects you were working on?
No, it wasn't a heck of a lot different than what I'd been doing. The same type of work. Well, the one thing I did with Fish and Wildlife Service I didn't do with anybody else was when I first started working with Fish and Wildlife Service was doing waterfowl studies out on the Yukon Delta. And I did that for a couple of years. Summertime work, you didn't work out there in the wintertime. But they were summer jobs, or things that we did in the summer. So, but that was in the first few years that, matter of fact, I can't remember just a minute how many times I went out there, just a couple of years, but it was a good initiation. Working with the people, the native people out there was fun. They, I don't know, they just had a certain something about them. They were real characters, some of those guys. And I know I had one fellow, his name was Jack. I can't remember what his last name was, it's immaterial. But he loved to let him, when I let him run our outboard motor on boats. And we have pretty good equipment out there, and most of it was better than what the natives had to run. And he just dearly loved to run my outboard. We'd be going up and down these sloughs to various study areas. And then one day we got, or one time we got somebody from Anchorage, and I don't know, he was very good at what he did. He was a biologist of some sort, but he was a huge guy. I mean, he was big. Not just big in bone, he was big around too. And we got instructions where to pick him up. He came in with an airplane and dumped him off until we picked him up in our boat and then took him over to our camp. But en route, he sat in the middle, and I mean, he was big. And remember Jack, who was a native boy there, and he said, "Oh my, Sig," he says, "we never go fast no more." And I'll never forget that. I can't remember the guy's name. That was a big, hefty guy, a real nice fellow, and very, very good biologist. But I'll never forget Jack's term or comment, "We never go fast again." They loved that speed in the outboards. So.
What was transportation like in Southeast then? How did you get around?
Oh goodness, it ranged from just your plain old skiffs that we ran around in at times, but we depended on the, particularly on the enforcement people. They had big power boats, and we had some pretty good sized boats for bad weather and this type of thing that we would be able to use or go along with one way or another when it was too rough or too cold in the wintertime, particularly. These bigger boats, and most of the enforcement people had boats that had cabins on them, so made travel an awful lot easier. Running around in the middle of the winter in Southeast Alaska in a skiff is no fun. And but we did what you had to do. But that's primarily the way. And then later, as airplanes got into the act, it was a more and more. Well, we had airplanes that we could use, get us here and there from Fish and Wildlife Service primarily, and the enforcement agents would fly us around, drop us off, and pick us up. But they were the ones that had the aircraft. But as time went on, the boats got bigger and better, and we didn't have to rely on aircraft as much as we did at first, in my recollection. But there were times when that was the way you had to get around. They drop you off, and then they come and pick you up. So it all depended on what kind of project you happened to be on, whether it was just an overnight affair or you were going to be out there for several weeks or whatever.
What kind of projects were you working on?
Well, I did a lot of work on, associated with the timber management here. defining being sure that the areas along streams, for example, were not torn all up by logging. Areas were left, particularly areas where deer wintered, were protected. Those areas were not torn up by logging or destroyed by logging, and definition of these areas is what, and it wasn't something that you could just say, draw a line on a map and say this is it. A lot of it you had to go out and look at and know what was, what areas were critical and important. And as a whole, looking back on it, I think we did pretty well with the timber management part of the Fish and Wildlife Service, or I mean, I didn't say Fish and Wildlife, the Forest Service. And we did pretty well on observing what should be cut and could be cut without damaging streams and wildlife habitat, wintered habitat for deer, for example. They had to have those strips down close to the beach. So there's a lot of areas, I don't think today you go and take a look at them, you wouldn't realize it, but a lot of the areas where the timber was left, and then it screens what they did behind, oftentimes. So that was just part of the game, one of those things you did. And for the most part, we all worked together. I know I can't remember, you know, having the forestry people, the ones who were in charge of managing the timber, so to speak, or the country from that standpoint. I can't ever remember having any real difficult times convincing them. They're real common sense people, and so this area here is a critical deer wintering area, or moose wintering area, whatever. And they always just used a lot of common sense and agreed that this had to be done or could be done, and sometimes they'd come up with better suggestions than myself or other biologists had. Because an awful lot of those people had a lot of experience on what you could do and what you couldn't do with their previous logging experience, or not logging themselves, but being responsible for how logging was done. In other words, timber management.
How many wildlife biologists were there in the forest service?
Gee, I couldn't. There weren't too many. I can't say how many. I can't remember how many there were. Most of the biologists were, of course, with Fish and Wildlife, and then Fish and Wildlife and Alaska Department of Fish and Game. And that's why I couldn't give offhand. I can't tell you how many there were around.
Were there other Forest Service wildlife biologists, or were you the first?
Well, I was more or less the first one, but no, there were some others, and I was at least one of the first ones that they had. And and as I say, I can't honestly remember who else came in behind me. And when I think about wildlife biologists, I'm thinking about as people and not exactly remembering for sure who they were working for. But I think the important thing was that the Forest Service did recognize the need to do this. I can't remember having a hard time putting anything over, as long as there was some common sense to it. And a definite need to do something. I can't remember having any real trouble with the Forest Service as such. They pretty much respected any of, whether they came from the state or from somebody in the Forest Service. They were pretty good at recognizing the need and not saying, well, you guys can just go blow your horn, we're going to cut that timber anyhow. They were, for the most part, as I remember, pretty cooperative. And there were things that had been set up, I think, at various times, and they couldn't back out of for one reason or another. But by and large, general management, I think there's pretty good cooperation over the years. There was a general sort of a, between the fish and or the wildlife and fisheries people, and then the timber people giving each other a hard time. Do that just for the fun of it, I guess.
You mentioned the timber sales and issues. Were there other issues that you recall that were hot topics during your career?
Well, the other issues would be how the fisheries were being done, which of course was none of our business. This was between the Fish and Game, primarily. Heard somebody talking to us up there? Blue Jays?
Yeah, Stellar Jay up there.
Yeah. So I wish those guys get off there. I got some food I want to get down there.
Are there any bear issues, brown bear issues in the Southeast that you dealt with?
Not really. I can't remember anything where we needed to do anything about bears other than keep people apprised of the fact that they were there first. And I can't honestly remember any problems with brown bear that were the result of logging or anything like that. I think bears were pretty, as long as there was feed for them and some cover, and the fact, they could go way up the mountain, I don't think there was that much of a problem due to the logged areas. I won't say there wasn't any problem, because I don't think bears liked the logged over areas in preference to the original, what was there originally. But I think they were able to cope with it. I can't remember any reduction of bear populations or anything like this as a result of the logging, other than I'm sure a few brown bears got killed by the loggers for one reason or another. But I don't remember any, that is, I personally remember any real problems as such.
Did you have any experiences with bears that stuck in your mind?
No.
No stories of bears encounters?
No. The bears that I ran across, which weren't that many, frankly, but they generally wanted to be on their way. And I remember, I think one, where there's a big tree, and I was on the other side of it. I was on one side of it, and I didn't know that there was a bear on the other side of it until we discovered each other. But I never had any bad experiences or problems with bears at all. And I don't think it was my skill as a woodsman or anything like that. It was just a matter of common sense, what have you.
You had a note here about a bear encounter with a group of Forest Service visitors. You wanted to see fish migrating? Up a sand.
Golly. I was wondering when I had that down, and why did I put that down? The only thing I can think of was a group of people down here on Pack Creek. And I frankly don't remember that it was a Forest Service thing, but I put it down there, maybe it was. But anyhow, it was all these people on one side of the river and all the bears, and there were a whole bunch of bears down there. And nobody got in anybody else's way there, but I remember the number of bears there in Pack Creek and the number of people looking at them. I thought that was kind of a who's looking at who situation. I haven't, for all the running around in the woods that I did over the years, I just never had any real bear problems. Not that I wanted any, or regret that I didn't have any, because they were there first, as far as I was concerned.
Were you involved with some animal transplants, moose or elk?
No, I know that they did them, but I never was involved in them personally. They put elk on a Fog Neck Island and things like that. No, I wasn't involved in. Had enough to learn about with what was already there. What do we got here? Oh, yeah, I've got one little guy. I've got to get my hummingbird feeder out. I usually have one. Oh, we got pretty good weather. The stick is nice and straight now. Yeah. When it gets real dry, it cools up, and when it gets wet, then it gets into a bowl.
Can you think of any especially dangerous or frightening experiences during your career that stick in your mind? Think about travel and I bet that was
frankly, I can't think of anything that was real scary. I don't know, I guess we got to the point where we traveled around enough to know that you didn't try to stretch your safety situation. No. I frankly can't remember of any really drastic situations that I was in personally. You know, time or two we had to land and get some gas and stuff like that, but nothing where I hope we make it, you know, or anything like that. Did put a lot of time in looking for Clarence Rhodes. I don't know if you remember him or not. He used to be the head of the Fish and Wildlife Service here, and he disappeared. And they had this tremendous, he was a very popular person for one thing here in Juneau. And he just disappeared. He was a pilot, and he was flying up in the Brooks Range. He left, I remember he left Barrow to fly back south to Fairbanks, I guess. And it was in a Fish and Wildlife airplane. And just never showed up. And he was a very popular person, very well known and very respected by all kinds of people. And so there was this massive hunt went for him. And most of it up in the Brooks Range, because that's where he left Barrow. He didn't get the Fairbanks, so we knew generally where he must have been. I forget how many weeks we flew looking for him. I kind of kept track of the number of hours, and I figured that I had flown at least once around the world in terms of mileage. And several years later, two women who were hiking from Barrow to Fairbanks or some outdoor adventure that they were on, and they found him. And how, with all the people, there was a massive search. It was, well, when you, it isn't a very big area. An airplane plows in doesn't mean you're going to see a lot of it. But these two gals, as I remember it, there's no blossoms on my little Minnesota balsam. It's the only one in Alaska, I'll bet you. It came from Ely. Well, anyway.
It was like 20 years.
Oh no, it was.
Within a couple years.
Oh no, I would say maybe it was 5 years. That's a guess, but it was fairly substantial time.
Yeah.
And I was supposed to be with him on that flight.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. He was, I forget the circumstances, but he asked me if I wanted to go with him, and I said, I'd sure like to go with you on this trip, but I've already committed myself to this other project. It was when we were looking for new national forests and that type of thing, when they were all the northern country that had never been, it was just, nothing had ever been done with it, and we were looking at it for the possibility of new national forest.
Forests or refuges, or could have been either?
Could have been either, but we were looking for, I was with the Forest Service then. But anyhow, that was quite something. And just a decision. I already promised I was going to go on this other thing, and I didn't feel I could back out. Otherwise, I'd have been with Clark. Maybe we'd have gone someplace else, and he wouldn't have piled up. Who knows? But I don't know. It was an interesting life. I certainly enjoyed it, or have enjoyed it, and my family's still here, and they have no urge to go. Alaska's their home. They have no urge to go back to Minnesota or anything like that, other than to visit. And their visits are usually short.
What family do you have here?
I have two sons. One son and his family live in Palmer, and my older son lives in Anchorage. And did I say my oldest son lives in, no, my youngest son lives in Anchorage. My oldest son lives in Palmer. You can get this straight. And but they were both born in Alaska, so that's where they have chosen to live. And, well, my oldest son retired. I can't believe it, but I've got great-grandchildren. That was kind of a surprise. I didn't think about it that way. And he said, Dad, you're a great grandfather. Well, I can still ski better than him anyhow.
Well, in your lifetime and career in wildlife, have you seen, tell me what changes maybe you've seen in what you were doing as a young biologist versus what biologists are doing now, or what the issues were then versus what they're doing?
Well, golly, you know, I can't be very specific, frankly. I've been away from it for so long, but I think basically it hasn't changed very much. But I think the important thing is the philosophy hasn't changed. But the methods that we have to use, or that they have to use today, are so technical and so much, give you so much more information and whatnot than we had when you were out there counting things like this, instead of doing things on computers. That's a tremendous difference, and I think it's given the wildlife and fisheries people, whoever else is involved in things like this, it has given them advantages and the ability to do a much better job of management than we were able to do because of the information that they can deal with and how they can deal with it. And I think that's been really important. And it's just given a lot more flexibility, a lot better understanding, a lot better ability to do things with the wonderful instruments that we have to, I say we, that they have to work with nowadays. We thought we were well supplied. We had a pair of binoculars and an adding machine in the office, as opposed to what they have today in terms of things that they can do with computers and whatever else they have. And it's been all put together and used, I'm sure, very skillfully. But sometimes I think of a story. A couple of old-timers, been in the country a long time, they hiked up a ridge that overlooked this nice valley that they'd done a lot of work in their past younger years. They were looking down this area, and one of them said, "Well, John, what do you think?" And John puffed on his pipe a little bit, didn't say anything for a while. And he said, "Well, pretty, ain't it?" "Yeah, pretty." And all this area that they had done the original work in was beautiful ranches and whatever else. It was just highways going through it. They still looked very nice. Finally, the other guy took a puff on his pipe, and he said, "Well, I'll tell you, John, one thing. You know, I liked it better when it was like it was." And I thought, how graphic a statement you made. I liked it better when it was like it was. And I guess I have to say, in a way, I think most anybody who's been around a fairly long time looks back fondly on some of the way things were when they were growing up or when they were first working or whatever. Not that it's bad. I don't have any problems with the way things are right now. But that opportunity to be first to do a lot of things that hadn't been done, go places where people hadn't gone very often. I regarded that as a real privilege in my life. And I'm perfectly happy to sit back and look at it, and it gives me a lot of pleasure, I know. I think one thing is I've had very little of, and I don't know if it's bragging or not, but I've never felt like I should have done something. And I think the reason I can say that, there wasn't much to be done. I mean, there was a lot to be done, and nobody had done it up here. So no matter what you did, you were, one way or another, you were probably fairly first in it, particularly as regards to wildlife and fisheries work, that type of thing. It was all a new thing that was, and I think of the things that they do today compared to what we did. My goodness, it's been a giant's leap, so to speak.
When did you retire, and what position were you in when you retired?
Oh, goodness. I retired in the heck was it? Down there someplace.
1980.
1980, yes. It was 1980. And
What position were you in at that time?
oh, golly, it was, more or less the head of wildlife management for the forest, or habitat management stuff for the Forest Service at that point. And down there someplace, but that was what I was mostly concerned with, you know, how are we conducting our Forest Service activities and this type of thing, and relative to critical habitat and that sort of things. And we had fisheries biologists and wildlife biologists and things like that to do that, but that was the aim and the objective of the various I won't just say I'd say wildlife habitat, but the actual management of all the resources that were on national forests in particular. Didn't have anything to do with the state, though. So, I had an opportunity at one point of going to the state, and a fellow by the name of Ray Nevin, who was with the Forest Service at that time, I think it was, he wasn't a biologist, or he wasn't a forester. He was in their administrative thing. And he said, you better not think of going to the state. He said, you're going to sacrifice an awful lot of federal time that you have built up over the years, you know, various places and things that you've done. He said, it would be a big mistake. So I said, okay, right. You've always been right. I agreed with him, and I sometimes look back and wonder what it might have been like, but not regretting it, really.
Was he one of your mentors, and did you have others that you...
No, he was just one of the fellow I worked with. I think if I had any one person I would call a mentor, was a fellow who got me up here in the first place. Name was Nelson, Pete Nelson. Never knew what his real name was, but we always called it. And he was head of wildlife management here in the Fish and Wildlife Service. But he's the one that got me to come up here. Because he had gone to the University of Minnesota, which is where I had gone. And I didn't know him then, but I forget the mechanics or how it all evolved, but he was the one that was responsible for me coming up here. Let me know about the job was available, and so I did.
You were married at the time. What did your wife think about coming up?
Well, I remember going home. I think I got exactly what I was doing at the time. But we talked about it, but it was a matter of deciding whether or not. And I made the decision sort of independently. And so when I made my commitment, I didn't make it from home. I did it from my office or wherever it was. And I said, yes. How'd you like to go to Alaska? She says, oh. And I said, yeah, I accepted a position up there. She says, well, I knew you were thinking about it. She said, I wondered when you were going to make up your mind. Great, let's go. So she was all in favor of it. I thought, because of her family and stuff down there, that it might be tough for her to do it. It wasn't a bit. I think she was as eager, if not more so, than I was, which is great. And she was always that way. She wasn't afraid to do things. That was as long as there was a common sense and good reasons, and she never backed off of anything like that, which was a real asset for me over the years that we had together.
You moved around quite a bit, too, in your earlier years.
Oh, yeah. But you can never remember her complaining about anything. She liked every place we were. Ketchikan, Petersburg, Fairbanks, Juneau, Anchorage. Not in that order, but it gave us a good chance to see a lot of different parts of Alaska. Met off so many people in different places, and all of them had their special people. For one reason or another, it was. I look back on it as a real privilege. Not that Alaskans aren't just plain ordinary people, but somehow there's something different about them.
Just for a minute while the trash. Do you want to talk about any life experiences or work experiences that you want to mention and
well,
haven't touched on?
I guess the one thing I can say, or one thing I can say, there's several things that I could say, but the privilege of working with the kind of people in the Fish and Wildlife, the state, the Forest Service. And I can't honestly say I like the Forest Service better than I like the Fish and Wildlife Service. I worked for such a short time for the state, so to speak. It was just sort of an in-between thing. But the kind of people that I was able to work with, and how well they put up with me. But no, it was the the kind of people that I worked with and the friends that I was able to make over the years, I just couldn't ask for better. I don't know, I guess I'm prone to think that Alaskans in some way, and particularly in the earlier years, were just a little bit different than what you ran across ordinarily going down the street, or even living in northern Minnesota, where we had people who were probably as close to being Alaskans as anybody else elsewhere. But I don't know, I just always felt Alaskan people that came up here and were Alaskans as such were, it was a real privilege to have started out my working life, so to speak, and my whole career. Just was, I just think it was a golden opportunity, and I was able to take advantage of it. I never regretted it at all. And the things I can do, there were just a lot of things that you could do that people hadn't done or done very little, and it ranged from trips I've made down rivers, up in the interior, canoe trips we've made long river trips up there at various times, just for the fun of it. And I don't know, I think that just there's something about the people here who live here in Alaska, and it probably came through stronger when I was I hadn't lived here and was still in the learning stages and that type of thing. But there's just always been a special type of people that live up here as a whole. And I might have, maybe if I'd have gone to Wyoming or out west someplace, which where I was really aiming for at first, but I might say the same thing. But I think that Alaska, because it was developing and had the opportunity to sort of develop with it, I guess, is a big privilege. Seen it and maybe helped it grow up a little bit over the years. It certainly helped me, I know.
Are there some names of people that you recall that were especially memorable in your career?
Oh, probably Pete Nelson that I mentioned, Lee Ellis, down in Wrangell. Various people worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service, and Ray Tremblay, Ray Wolford. I guess I mentioned Pete Nelson. I'm not a great one for remembering names, but go out and say, I'm an Alaskan and I'm going to act like one. It's just the way they naturally are. Particularly more so, I think, in the earlier days when things were still in the developmental stage of opening up country and this type of thing. And I feel glad that, or privileged that I was able to get in at least on some of that. There were still things to do that hadn't been done, that sort of thing. But the challenge of living here, just your own life. The adventure that there was, and things like going down the river overnight with the island, nobody had ever gone down, doing things like that. not to brag about it, but just you could do it. And the attitude of people towards the country has been very much like it is in northern Minnesota. You like the country, you like the wild country, and this type of thing. And so I didn't feel like I was stepping into a place where I was unfamiliar. I was able to use what I'd learned to do in Minnesota, Canada, in my guiding and hunting and skiing and all that sort of stuff. I found I could do the same thing up here. Not quite on the same scale sometimes more, sometimes less. But I haven't been disappointed in how things go at all. Certainly enjoyed the skiing. Still enjoying it. I went up yesterday and skied for 2 hours up there. There's still enough snow if you want to run around and go cross country. And it's, been talking mostly from my own standpoint, but my kids haven't migrated out. They wouldn't stay anyplace else but here. And they enjoy working here. My oldest son is retired now, and he was, of all things, I can still see Esther's face when he announced that he was going off to be an airplane pilot or a helicopter pilot. And he was, all during the war, all during the Vietnam War and whatnot. And came back to Anchorage, flew a lot up there for state police and whatnot. Matter of fact, my wife and I, we lived up in Anchorage. We used to go up on a mountainside and every once in a while, in the summertime particularly, and have a picnic lunch up there. We could look out over. More than once, old Gregory comes along in his helicopter and he's flying for the state troopers. He'd find us up there and he'd sit down, land there, and come over and beg for a sandwich or something. I thought, where else could you do things like this?
So did your other boy go into wildlife management? Do you have any
No.
kids that are interested in wildlife?
No. Robert has been with the Xerox people ever since he got here. He's always been facts and figures type person. And so no, there hasn't been anything similar to mine for my kids. Well, either one of them. Greg, of course, was being a pilot and that type of thing. And in a way, I always thought I'd like to be a pilot. Probably a good thing I wasn't one. But he sort of satisfied my wish to fly.
So you've been retired since 1980. Tell me what you've been doing. You've been skiing.
What I've been doing? Enjoying life in particular. I've done a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot of traveling, but some traveling, and a lot of the outdoor things that you do around Juneau here. I don't know, I just enjoyed living here in Alaska, and haven't made any great trips anyplace other than the occasional foray south.
Fishing?
Oh yeah, I used to fish a lot. My boat's sitting out there, but my son's coming down from Fairbanks or Anchorage and picking it up here this summer and bringing it back. I don't use it anymore. I just I used it so much. We did so much fishing together, and after my wife passed away, and I did a lot of fishing and hiking and skiing with friend Lucy McPherson. I don't know if you knew who she was or not, but her husband passed away about the time Esther's mine did. And we just were friends. We just did a lot of good skiing, and she was a ski instructor up at Eagle Crest, and so we did a lot of skiing, and she was a good hiker, and a lot better fisherman than I was. I always use the excuse, well, I gotta take care of the motor and all that sort of thing, so I can't quite put the attention in. And I've got another friend, Bert Hubbard, who I used to fish with us quite a bit. And you two have to do the fishing while I run the outboard. That was my excuse for not catching as many fish. No, that was down there. They're getting ready to put in this big skating rink or something down here, and they're hauling a lot of material in there, and they go from dawn to dark, and sometimes in the dark they're hauling in big old trucks. I'll be glad when it's over with.
Yeah. Well, you'll be down there skating when it gets built.
Well, I probably will. I do a lot of skiing. We didn't have very good ice to skate on this year, though. Although I will say for a while, Twin Lakes was good skating, but it didn't last very long.
Well, is there anything else you can think of to close this out? We've not covered most everything.
Well, I can't really think of anything other than I guess I just can't think of living anyplace else or going anyplace else. I could go back to Minnesota, and I could probably be fairly happy back there, but I don't know. I spent too much time here. My wife and I spent too much time up here to regard any place else as any kind of home. This is home. I lived here far longer than I lived at where I grew up. And I'm comfortable, and all my friends are here, so I can do the things that I like to do without any great problems. I don't travel a lot anymore, or not much reason to. And I don't know if that's a good answer to your question or not, but it's just this is home. And I used to think of, like my folks would always say about going home. That's where they were born and raised. But, and once in a while I think of Ely, Minnesota as being home, but I don't think of it as being home. I've lived here far longer than I ever lived in Ely, Minnesota. And so I'll have to say that life's been good to me, and I enjoy living here. I can do the things I like to do, and sometimes the decisions are kind of hard to make. I don't know whether I want to go skiing or I'm going to go rollerblading this afternoon.
It's great.
Rollerblading is great. It's out to North Douglas. It's kind of a long ride to drive out the end. Of course, it's about 8 miles. But there's a nice stretch of highway about the last mile between there and the trail that goes down to Otter Point. And they haven't put on that new kind of rough stuff that's on now, most of the highways. And it's real nice and smooth. So go out there and do 2-3 rounds of that. Go down to the beach and have lunch and then come on home or something. But things like that, you know, is what life's all about, I guess, at this stage of the game anyhow. And being able to do that, and of course ski all winter. And I'm very thankful for, in a way, having the privilege of being able to do these things. And I worry a little bit about when is all this good stuff going to quit, but I'm not going to quit until it does, comes along. I enjoy it too much. And not only from my own standpoint, but the kind of people that you associate with doing these kind of things. They've always been a special group of people to me, because my growing up times, I grew up among people like this. They were skiers, whatnot, and hikers, canoers. So I still am able to be with people like that. I used to, before I ever learned anything about downhill, I used to ski jump. And it was, I'll show you a picture. Just sit tight, I'll be right back.